Soy Luis Miguel González del Economista y tengo un enorme gusto de presentar a uno de los mayores expertos del mundo en bienes raíces, Spencer Levy, CBRE. Welcome, Spencer. How are you?
I'm great. Great to be back in Mexico City. As we were talking before, this might be my 25th trip here. Love it here.
How does Mexico looks right now, March 25?
Well, first of all, you gave me a beautiful weather day out there, so I'd rather be doing this interview outdoors. But Mexico looks very good, and I look at it from an economic perspective. And the reason why Mexico looks very good is why Mexico has looked very good for the last 10 plus years, which is there are so many industries here that are thriving, led by manufacturing, industrial, but other forms of real estate are doing well, also retail. I think that Mexico has many competitive advantages over other markets around the world, which are only going to get stronger. They have a very deep and inexpensive labor force. They have proximity to the United States. They got great weather today and great newscasters like you.
You mentioned the last 10 years. How does in this changing era,
well, I would say
serve the last 10 years to look into the future?
I think the competitive advantages of Mexico aren't going anywhere. And these competitive advantages are some of the things I mentioned a moment ago, having to do with the low cost of labor, proximity to the United States, lots of virtuous cycles of manufacturing. When I say that, what I mean is manufacturing can't be done in a desert. It has to be done near other manufacturing, near logistics, near industrial. And so you have all these clusters here in Mexico that have formed around certain industries, notably automotive, but there are other pharmaceuticals. And I think those are only going to get better as the years progress, because most of the world has a labor shortage. Mexico does not.
Last 2 or 3 years, the conversation in Mexico about real estate has been dominated by a magical word, nearshoring. How does nearshoring look like right now?
Well, I think nearshoring is a big word that really means, on one hand, you have globalization. On the other hand, you have nearshoring. And the question is, are we deglobalizing, meaning are we moving as a world away from China and Asia and towards the Americas? I think to some degree we are, but not to this as much as a lot of people think. Because much as I was suggesting a moment ago that Mexico is building these regions within the country that have these virtuous cycles of manufacturing, they're already in Asia, and they're very hard to pick up and move. So I think the world is moving towards nearshoring for a lot of the reasons we've talked about, the cheap labor force, proximity to the United States. But I think that we're still going to be in a very global trade world for a very long time, which I think is good, because I think that certain countries have competitive advantages in making certain types of goods and services, and that will continue. So yes, nearshoring is going to help Mexico a lot, and Mexico until a couple of years ago was the #1 destination of foreign capital, of foreign direct investment. I think China put in $25 billion one year. I mean, it's a huge numbers coming here, and I think that will continue.
You've been here in Mexico like 25 times.
Mexico City. I've also been to the touristy areas on the like Riviera de Maya and Cancun, but I come here to Mexico City a lot.
Let's talk about regions in Mexico. We have the border, we have Bajío, the Valle de Mexico, western cities like Guadalajara. How do you compare those regions from the real estate point of view?
When you're dealing with regions outside of Mexico City, outside of the tourist areas that are closer to the border, those are the real areas of interest for manufacturing and industrial real estate. Once you're dealing with deeper population centers like we have here in Mexico City, that opens the door to other forms of real estate, most notably office, but also retail, and an area which I think Mexico is lagging, but I think that people should take a firmer push into, is multifamily, is apartments. I remember about 15 years ago, I wrote a white paper about why people should build and buy more apartment buildings in Europe. And they thought I was crazy because Europe had all of these regulatory reasons, landlord-tenant laws that made it very difficult to build and to operate those things. And candidly, you have many of those challenges here in Mexico today. But that is the opportunity. If you are able to somehow modify some of these regulations, you have a golden opportunity to build apartments here because Mexico needs it. I think the world is housing short.
Wait, we were talking about the industrial facilities, and then you jump and talk about residential.
Yes.
And say, let's start the conversation about residential, not meaning stop talking about industrial.
Sure.
But there's a huge window of opportunity.
That's correct. I mean, look, I think for the global investor, the reason why industrial looks so good is not just the nearshoring, it's not just these clusters. There are some very bottom line economic reasons. Most industrial transactions are priced in American dollars. They are not priced in pesos. Retail deals are priced in pesos. Multifamily deals are priced in pesos. Makes it much more difficult to transact. And the reason is the inflationary risks associated with the peso. It's why it's very difficult to do certain types of deals in Brazil, because all the deals there are done in the real, their local currency. But the fact that industrial can do it in American currency has given a level of stability to that market that it probably wouldn't have had otherwise.
So you mentioned multifamily residential as an opportunity. Is there any zone that you like the most? We have a lot of Americans that are looking in beaches, but there's also big urban, for example, Monterrey, for example, Guadalajara, Mexico City, Tijuana.
Those are the places I'm thinking of. I'm not thinking about the touristy areas. There's condominiums, and then there is rental housing that you use for your primary residence. Condominiums, maybe your primary residence, maybe a vacation home. I'm talking about the cities you just mentioned, including Mexico City, that I think is ripe for a lot of new multifamily development rental. The challenge being the regulatory environment, where it's challenging when you build, challenging A, to build it, B, once you do build it, the relationship between landlord and tenant makes it very challenging to operate it. But I think that's the opportunity here. I think that if you want to have new housing that in a place that desperately needs it, these are the things that the developers should be speaking to the local politicians about.
I've been reading the most recent issue in The Economist, and they say there's a big temptation all over the world to regulate rents.
Yes.
What's the advice you give to the politicians, to the public?
Well, first of all, you should know that The Economist magazine is my favorite magazine. I'm not just saying it because I'm on your show, right? And I love it because it's so dense, it's so thought-provoking. But the challenge with rent regulation is it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of, I want my tenants to live a better life, not be rent poor. That's a term people use. And by doing that, we're going to limit the amount of rent they pay. The challenge is if you do that, people won't build any more of it. It is a direct relationship between rent regulation and limiting new supply. The only solution to affordable housing is more supply. And if you want more supply, the question is, well, how do you do it and also keep rents affordable for others? If you create enough supply, it will bring rents down. Is it a longer term thing? Absolutely is. And so in the short term, the challenge for the existing renter is they may have more upward pressure on their rents. But over the long term, you will bring rents down if you have more supply. So I certainly understand the political pressure behind rent regulation, and I'm not going to suggest that their motivations are bad because they want to keep rents down. But if their motivation is to have greater supply, cheaper housing over the long term, I'd ask them to consider the implications to supply of some of the rent regulation.